Prime Minister's speech in English.
The National Day Rally was held for the first time this year at the Singapore Conference Hall. This annual event was attended by more than 1,000 guests and brought together Singaporeans from all walks of life, including members of RCs, CCCs, and MCCs. Ministers were also present to hear the Prime Minister deliver his National Day Rally speech in Malay, Mandarin, and English. And here now is the Prime Minister's speech in English.
Saudara penonton, Perdana Menteri.
Perumakkalé, Pradhamar avargal.
各位来宾，现在是总理致辞。
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
Friends and fellow citizens, it's symbolic of the change in our lives and the speed of change that I find myself in the conference hall in air-conditioned comfort, which makes a great difference in the physical effort required. But of course, it also means I've lost a certain atmosphere. And the mood, the interaction between community center leaders, consultative committees, residence committees, the things they laugh at, the things they don't laugh at, they mean important matters of great moment. So when I had some laughter from the crowd because they thought it was funny that, and so I thought it was funny that the SBC trying to recreate old Singapore and rioters and so on, hired a few rather well-dressed, well-fed people to pretend to be rioters. And they couldn't even muster the energy to be angry or to look angry. I thought, God, this is real change, perhaps for the better. I don't know, we may meet next year in better premises, I hope. "10 years down the road, my successor will have a modern concert hall, conference hall. But I read Mr. Rajaratnam in today's Tao Pao, he suggested that I was good for 20 years. The nub of the problem is that we are not able to be problem solvers for very much longer. And therefore, we must get into place a system which will guarantee that it will continue, even if conditions become adverse, and even if the leaders are unable to have the same rapport, empathy, and can make them give that extra ounce, more energy, effort, sacrifice. Because that was what it called for before we got here. Of course, now we've got here, it always looks very easy. If you look at the reports of the various companies, you think, well, see, should have been predicted a long time ago. I think we ought to take stock and see whether, in fact, it was the natural course of events. Several countries have done as well as we have in the last 20 years. Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea. But we are different. The closest, greater similarities, Hong Kong. It's a city-state. But the texture of the two societies, vastly different. They never had the chance to develop their own separate identity. And the British government did not believe that they had the opportunity or the leeway to allow any social identity or separate cultural distinct society to emerge, which was what Singapore was when they were in charge. What have we done that's made it different? We emphasized all the common interests of everybody. And we awaken common responses. It's active nation building. It's a pretentious word, but I use it for want of nothing more suitable. We had to get a group of disparate, totally different, accidental co-citizens to feel that they got to make common cause. And it could have been very different. The Tamils in Jaffna and the Sinhalese in the rest of Ceylon have been living on the same island for 2,000 years. They're still at it. And it makes gruesome and terrible reading. What gives Singaporeans this deep sense of personal pride? Because we made them submerge their differences, mute it, seek a common ground for mutual benefit. And it's worked. That's the acid test. It's worked. And the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore is really the difference in the structure and the distribution of wealth and power. They're not synonymous. In many societies, if you've got power, you've got wealth. In some societies, if you've got wealth, you've got power. In Singapore, there are two different things. And we should keep them two different things, two different entities. Now, you imagine a Singapore without the CPF, without 340,000 homeowners, either they're HDB or HUDC homes. You imagine a Singapore where workers have high wages and pay very high rents for tiny little cubicles, which they do in Hong Kong. You imagine a Singapore where workers earn more than Singaporeans. Hong Kong workers get more than Singaporean workers, at least before the recent turn of events. And where their savings are regularly depleted by finance companies or deposit-taking companies vanishing or going broke or something happening. Or manipulation of the stock market. You just cleaned out. And just imagine how resentful, sullen, disgruntled, resigned, fatalistic Singaporeans would have been, and how disparate they would have been, because you then cling together to people whom you feel you can trust, your family, your clan. We have broken through all that compartmentalization. We have created a degree of trust. If I cast my mind back on National Day at the Padang, I was not, it was important that the parade should go well, or somebody will have to answer for it, either the Minister of Defense or his Chief of Staff or whatever. But what was important, what I was looking for, was the mood of the parents who were watching their sons and daughters or nieces and nephews marching, taking part, parading, or bringing their young children around. They are members of various community associations, the CCCs, the MCs, and now the RCs. They are important people in our setup. This is part of the power distribution. They enable signals to go up. You can reach the highest persons in the land through this net. You look for your RC man, he'll bring you either to the CCC or to the, if he's in on good terms with the MP, he'll bring you to the MP direct, and he will find access either to the head of HDB or whatever, and if necessary, finally to me. It is not just so many empty initials. When we set up the RCs, the HDB was extremely apprehensive because they knew that this meant pressure. Better services, quicker attention to repairs for lifts, breakdowns, water, all sorts of things. I said, no, it has to be done anyway. It started off 6 years ago, seven constituencies, including mine. See how it worked. And it worked. And they could cope. And we've brought a sense of community. And it is these invisible ties, the sense of belonging, the sense of security of life in Singapore, that makes it a different place. So when you look up at your flat in the sky, and you look at the landscape, greenery, the trees, the shrubs, the ponds, the gardens, the children's playground, the stadiums, you know that you are not only the owner of that flat, but collective owner of all that's around it too. And if you are the RC member, then the fruit, when it ripens, that's for you to reward who's been helping you. They say, no, don't plant fruit trees, we'll have a lot of trouble. But it's a negative approach. We tried, they died. I said, all right, try those which will live and get strong and will not bear fruit until they can stand vandalization. So we went for varieties that could do that. And it succeeded. If we never tried, we would never have made it. In 1964, I remember making a speech in Kampong Glam, Mr. Rajaratnam's constituency, just after a riot, a communal riot. I was really down in the dumps myself. And I painted this picture of rebuilding the old city. Because you've got to give people hope. And that was Precinct South. Nobody believed. That what was just a gleam in a few people's eyes is now a reality. Now the snag is this. What do we do? Because not only have we grown older, the younger generation starts off with a higher baseline and assumes that this is the natural order of things and they want to rise from here. And my response to that is, why not? Provided you're prepared to work. If you're prepared to give of your best, we'll reach out for the stars. Now, one quality, one factor, an intangible, that played a key part was rapport and trust. Rajaratnam, I read him from today's papers this morning, and I said, well, he's putting the pressure on the younger voters and say, if you vote stupidly, that's your bad luck. I put it in a different way. They are young. They have not known hardship. And I hope they never will, because it's part of my job not to bring unnecessary hardships. But we went through 6 years and 2 crises before we established that bond between the people and the government. 59, we had a very tough time. 59, 60, 61. 61, tremendous rows with the communists, fighting for our lives till 63. First crisis. Then we got into Malaysia. We found we had been ambushed. Communal riots. We again fought for our lives. Not the leaders' lives, the people's lives. We could have quietly, nobody, I think, would have blamed us if we acted like ordinary mortals and decided to take up some other career. Because we had nothing. The police had been surrendered. The army was in the hands of the federal government. All we had was the will not to yield. And that if we had to go down, there would be a terrible price to be paid. And they found it quite credible. That's why we have today's Singapore. That's why the generation that's alive and can remember 65 must know how fragile, how delicate this whole creation is. It's only 19 years. You can just flip the coin, moods change, problems galore, just wrong handling. But of course, as we established control over different problems, we also developed a certain finesse in dealing with our problems. And it is after the young leaders have gone through, taken you, the young voters, through one major crisis, and you know you're on your own, that there will be this bond. If not, well, it's very sad for everybody. I can only do our best, and you've got to do your best. And this is not fun and games. This is for keeps. What we can do before time runs out for us is to tackle all the difficult, spiky, sensitive issues. Nanyang University, it was going to die a slow, painful, tortuous, pitiful death. 78, I got it together into a joint campus with the University of Singapore. 81, I got both councils to agree, have a National University of Singapore and Kent Ridge, have a Nanyang Technological Institute, which will become a university at the Nanyang campus, which meant sorting out the problems in the schools, retrieving or saving 7 or 9 of the best schools for the special assistance program to try and keep, and I think it is worth keeping, a certain ambiance, perhaps old world style of courtesy and discipline, which you don't find in the English language schools, which is a pity. A certain easy informality. Teacher comes in, the students are rowdy, teacher goes out, nobody pays any attention. And the Chinese school, when the teacher comes in, you stand up. Lesson then starts. You greet the teacher, good morning, before the lesson starts. Old world, but extremely important points of courtesy, etiquette, that differentiates us from animals. Then recently, I could let Nanyang Xiangpao and Hsinchu Jitpao slug it out for a dwindling Chinese readership. It would have been a painful, really sad, futile scramble for a smaller pie. I urge them, get together, break into the new market, the new English educated. And I'm proud that we did do that. It succeeded. Profits increased. It made sense. You combine resources. And if it had not been successful, had it not made more profits, and had the monitor not posed a real long-term challenge, because there was the Sao Paulo to finance it for a long time, plus 3 banks, I don't think the Straits Times would have agreed to merger. Why should they? But this was a credible fight, and it would have been open, fair competition. And it is one where it will be different from all the last fights they had, where they smothered the other party. They were one-man shows, proprietary companies, just didn't have the stamina, they gave up. So all the spiky ones are the long-term ones. Of course, the most long-term and the most difficult to resolve are the large numbers of unmarried graduate women. I think it's better that the matter has been brought out. It cannot be solved by keeping it in the closet. It is an enormous cultural problem. Last year, 1983, the whole of 83, we did a count of the registry of marriages, all graduate men, 60%, more than 60% of them married non-graduates, which means more than 60% of women graduates either marry non-graduates or stay unmarried. Now, we have come out into the open. It was of interest to me that our man in Peking sent a copy of their newspaper. They have also said this is an enormous problem. They've got hundreds of thousands of them. Same culture. Okay? The male wants to be the dominant partner in the household. So he is comfortable with someone whose educational and earning capacity does not make him feel uncomfortable. Well, let's mitigate this problem. We have to deal with it tactfully, discreetly, sensitively, but whatever it is, it's however partial the solutions, it just cannot be let to drift. It is wrong, and for us to have kept quiet about it, having been alerted through the census figures, would have been cowardly. The core problem is self-renewal. How does this continue? Well, we've talent scouted, we've recruited, we've tested, and literally put them through very harsh, designed to test breaking point kind of duties. Like, metaphorically, it's like some of these machines for testing durability of materials. You tad, you pull it, see whether it'll stay in one piece. And those whom we have found are not only able but also the best, and by the best we mean not only honest and unselfish, but willing to and can relate to people, which is a very difficult attribute. You either have it or you don't have it. Specific policies will have to change with changing circumstances. They are not cast in concrete. And we cannot be confined by any dogmas or ideology. But our objective must be constant. The highest good to the most people. And if this leadership maintains and improves on this network of grassroots organizations, then they can galvanize the aspirations of the people who vote for them, and they can generate that sense or keep giving that impulse of common endeavor and a common destiny, because that's what we have. And it's because the Tamils in Jaffna and the Sinhalese in the rest of Ceylon just don't accept that that's one island and they have to live together, They have brought travail, misery, untold suffering. I would be less than frank if I said that all this change was smooth and plain sailing. It's not. There have been differences of views within the PAP leadership on the pace and the method of self-renewal. Some believe that the pace was and is too fast, that it could generate anxiety and uncertainty among some of the old guard MPs. Well, some preferred more recruitment of talent through PAP branches, promoting the activists and the loyalists. Unfortunately, we've tried this for years and years with such meager results. Now, some propose that we create conditions under which we can appeal to the idealism of youth, the same idealism which moved the older generation in the 1940s and the 1950s. How? How do we recreate the Japanese war, the Japanese occupation, the struggle for independence, the fight against the communists, the fight against the communalists? Mao, faced with the same problem, tried to recreate the Long March, and his Cultural Revolution wrought havoc on China, from which it has not recovered. Well, I am prepared to try all approaches and will tap party and other grassroots activists to add to the pool of talent. But my senior colleagues, Dr. Goh, Rajaratnam, and I, we believe there's no slowing down. We press on quickly, because I do not know how much time the old guards have got. My senior colleagues and I, we are all in our 60s, either early or late 60s. Last October, I had 3 of them in hospitals at the same time in different parts of the world. Rajaratnam was at the UN in October, had an infarct, ended up requiring convalescence. Whilst he was in New York, Dr. Goh went in for some treatment at SGH. Whilst he was there, Hon Sui Sen had an infarct, and so I visited 2 patients at one time and had reports on a 3rd patient in New York. Hon Sui Sen died after having lunch and a chat with Dr. Goh. Having recovered, doctor released him from intensive care. He had a massive infarct. That was it. Well, a skillful surgeon in London in November really, because I remember getting the report when I was conferencing in Delhi. Mr. Rajaratnam was under the knife. They did some plumbing to his heart. 4 extra plumbings. It was successful, and he's got a reprieve. Go King Sui has got a remission. In November, I got a fright. Last day of the conference, my doctor told me, let's go home. I started bleeding. So I said, no. What is it? I said, I don't know. I've been operated for piles. So I looked at it and said, let's go home. I said, why? Why not check up here? They must have instruments. I said, I have discussed all these possibilities before we left Singapore, and I've got introductions to all the people here from our doctors in Singapore who are friends of these Indian doctors. And they say anything requiring possible blood transfusions and other things, and in your case, I'm not going to take a chance we catch the first aircraft home. What could it be? He didn't tell me, but what else can it be? So a plane was diverted. Bahrain, Singapore, it went Bahrain, Delhi, and within 8 hours, from the time it took place, we were in Singapore. From the time we telephoned Singapore, which was very good work on the part of SIA, and I owe them a tribute for inconveniencing the passengers. But it also was an amber light. Well, Dr. Goh has given me notice that he's not standing for re-election. Rajaratnam also wants to stand down. Goh Keng Swee cannot be moved, and I'm trying to persuade Rajaratnam to go on for another term, or at least half a term. But the practice of big American corporations is for the chief executive officer to step down at 65. I believe this is based on sound medical reasons, because the chief executive officer has to ensure a smooth succession to secure the continuing progress of the enterprise. And I have a duty to do the same for Singapore. But even with the old guard in charge, this is what I'm fearful of. Things can go wrong very quickly. Nothing is more fearsome than to get an urgent telephone call within 2-3 hours of your just having gone to sleep. I've had them in my time, and I can tell you that your adrenaline then pours out, and you don't go back to sleep for the rest of that night. And you feel awful the next day. But whilst you're thinking out all the possible alternatives, there is no time to fret. But as with this function, I have to take more sips of water than I used to 10 years ago. I wouldn't like to wake up 2 hours and a half after I've just gone to sleep and find that I can't pour out that adrenaline. And I can't think out the answer fast enough. That's a disaster. Because we are a city-state. We are smaller than Hong Kong. We are less than half its population. They've got 5.5 million, we've got 2.5. And we've got just about half its area. And Hong Kong doesn't have to worry about foreign affairs and defense. The British look after it for them. And come 1997, I suppose, it'll be as well looked after by the Chinese. Even better, there'll be no threats at all from anybody. But ask yourself this question. And the answer that, if you know the answer to this, then you know what to do and what not to do. How is that this little island, 600 square kilometers, 2.5 million people, can give jobs to all its citizens, to everyone who wants a job, over 1 million of them, trying to induce the old to come back, trying to get the married to come back for part-time work, and gives jobs to more than 150,000 work permit holders. Over 10% of our workforce. More than 10%. How? All this huge subcontinent of India, Bangladesh, Ceylon is 30,000 square miles. I haven't gone metric yet. But, well, there's so many multiples of 200 square miles that you just don't worry about it. You want a Sri Lankan? There's no problem at all. What is it? Just organization, stability, efficient, effective, corruption-free government and administration. Everything works, whether it's water, electricity, gas, telephones, telexes. It just has to work. If it doesn't work, I want to know why. And if I'm not satisfied, as I often was not, the chief goes. And I have to find another chief. Firing a chief is very simple. Getting one who will do the job better, that's different. And the most critical factor is confidence. Confidence of the people, not just your own citizens, but confidence of foreign investors, foreign governments. Confidence that there is a government in Singapore that will act swiftly, rationally, and often predictably. I think there is a group of men who understand that and can do that, and you can predict what they're going to do. What I cannot say until they are put to the test is, can they persuade the people to jump over that high fence when it's necessary? I saw the Olympic trials, and the rider couldn't persuade the horse to go over. So he went over the top all by himself. And I thought to myself how lucky I was, because I got the horse. I said, come on, let's go. Giddy up. We can do it. The horse took a deep breath over the top. A golf pro once did a trick shot for me. I was in a crowd of admiring spectators. I said, marvelous. He put the golf club not with a face facing the ball, but with the back of the golf club facing the ball. Then he took a swing and whipped the ball, and off it went. I said, there must be a trick here. I said, do it again. He says, no, once is enough. Don't risk your luck a second time. That's how close we came to disaster. And when I read all these wiseacres, no group of men are wiser than a foreign correspondent who's been here 6 months. You know, if I were an Israeli, every letter, every wrong article will get a letter in reply. But it's so silly. They got it all wrong. They don't even know what happened when we were independent. They've come here, the thing works. Why? Lack of human rights, free press, tame, docile, too clean, sterilized. I thought to myself, God, I should get their predecessors back. One day, perhaps I should go through the old list of men who used to interview me in the 1950s and 60s and get SIA to fly them back. Free. The stench, the filth, the total confusion, the sense of despair and hopelessness. What did it? Human rights? Are they bankable? I used to tell them, and I said this on television often to them, I said, look, you tell the British government or the Australian government that they underwrite. If anything goes wrong, they will admit 2 million people. At that time, we were less than 2 million, 1.9 million people. They will admit them to Australia or Britain or America, and I will follow what you tell me. And if it comes to grief, you take my people. When you have no food, you tell me where you go when you haven't got a job. You go to the UN, you're right, or ILO in Geneva, all minimum conditions, minimum wage, what they should get. Millions are unemployed. What are they talking about? 30 million in Europe. You will turn up at the ILO office and they will give you a job. When you are hungry, you will go to the FAO. They will give you food. Or you're sick, you got no medicine. You go to WHO. Is it bankable? This is the only bank you have, the Singapore government. And if we don't do it right, your checks won't be honored. One flip of the coin and it goes sour and we have 20% unemployment. What do you do? I say 200,000. And it has happened, you know. I dug up the figures from the annual reports. 1929, 1933, the Depression years. The British repatriated over 600,000 Indians and Chinese, back to China, back to India. From Singapore alone, 200,000. Where are we going to repatriate our Chinese and our Indians and our Malays to? You're going to send them back to India and to China and to Malaysia or Indonesia? You're going to do this? Where do you queue up for your work permit? You know how they come here to get a job? They get cheated, robbed. So contemplate all this, and I say this especially for the growing group of the intelligentsia who read these magazines. Just remember, who wrote it? What is his stake what is his interest in your future before you believe him. I was once asked a whole series of questions by an Australian. Why we ban long hair, and why are we so tough on people who smoke marijuana, and so on and so forth. You know, it's so tiresome, so many things to do. So I said to him, look, let's assume that I'm only 3/4, it's a presumptuous, but let's assume that I'm only 3/4 as bright as you are. But I spend 20 hours of the day puzzling over this problem. You've only spent less than 20 minutes to think up all these questions. Do you think you know more about this and what's going to happen if I listen to you, or that in fact I have thought my problem through? They can't solve the heroin problem in Britain. The Lord Chief Justice says it's now gone rampant. I was doing my aerobics on my rowing machine, and I had BBC on, and they quoted Lord Chief Justice Lane. And he was very vivid. He says, there's no need to rob a bank. There's no need to take that risk. All you got to do is to sell heroin to the kids, and they will rob their parents. There's no need to rob the banks. You run a serious risk. When we were faced with this problem, we said, look, either they hang, or you'll never stop. And they didn't believe that we would hang them. We had to hang 4 before a dramatic drop. But you know, Amnesty International and all this human rights, they say, hanging is wrong. I say, look, if you believe them, when your child is, or your teenage son is a victim, look for them. See what remedy they have for you. But I believe we have the future relatively secure. It doesn't require the same Herculean efforts